Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've always preferred solitude. Growing up on a remote Oregon farm, my earliest memories were of wandering tree-lined trails and skipping stones across shallow creeks with nothing but the sound of wind and water for company. That quiet became my comfort, a silence I carried into adulthood, returning every summer to some forgotten patch of woods so deep even the sky felt smaller. Last August, craving that familiar peace, I packed light and drove miles off-grid to a region the old maps labeled only as Blackfish Preserve. The forest there was dense with crooked cedar and moss-sagging pine, and a silver creek cut through it like a vein. I pitched my one-man tent barely 3 feet from the water's edge, close enough that the gentle ripple would soothe me to sleep. Night came quickly under the trees, swallowing the daylight whole without so much as a sunset. Around 10 p.m., I snapped off my lantern, climbed into my thin sleeping bag, and let the melody of running water pull me under. I don't know how long I slept, but something pulled me awake, sharp and sudden, like surfacing from too deep underwater. Splash, swish. At first I thought it was a raccoon or maybe a deer crossing downstream. I held my breath and listened. The sound came again, but slower, heavier. Something large was shifting in the creek bed. I stayed still, heart ticking in my throat, half convinced it was my imagination. Then, clear as breath against glass, I heard it, a thick, wet exhale. That sound didn't belong in any forest. It was too close, almost right outside the paper-thin wall of the tent. I reached for my flashlight, fingers fumbling. Click! White light exploded inside the tent. Silence. Not a splash. Not a breath. I waited until my lungs ached, ears straining. Nothing. I convinced myself it was nothing too and switched the flashlight off. That was the mistake. The moment darkness came back, the sound returned, louder now. Something was dragging itself through the water, closer, closer. There were no footsteps, only a sickening slosh drag, like a body being pulled forward on its belly. My throat tightened. I played the light again. Silence. Total. Even the creek seemed to stop moving. I killed the beam and instantly heard a moist sucking inhale right behind me. This thing was toying with me. That's when the tent wall pressed inward. Just the faintest bulge, as though a palm, if it was a palm, were feeling its way along the nylon. I whispered a prayer I hadn't said since childhood and scrambled backwards, kicking wildly at the flimsy zipper flap. The moment it gave way, I bolted into the trees barefoot, branches whipping my shins as I ran blind in terror. Behind me came an awful, rasping growl, not loud but thick, like it was bubbling up through a throat filled with river mud. I didn't stop running until dawn's first pale glow seeped through the forest. I found my way back to camp hours later, guided by memory and shaking adrenaline. My tent stood exactly where I'd left it, intact, untouched, or so it seemed. No bear prints, no torn supplies, nothing out of place, except for one thing. There, in the mud of the creek bed, beginning from the center of the water rather than any shoreline, was a trail. 2 grooves about shoulder width apart, dragging toward the bank like someone had crawled out of the creek on their stomach. The track ended at my tent, right at the point where I'd seen the wall press inward. I called for a ranger. When he arrived, he squatted by the mud, frowning. "Bear?" I'd asked, voice trembling. He shook his head slowly. Bear would have come from the woods. Whatever this was came upstream. He followed the trail back toward the creek, but it vanished completely in the middle of the water, as though whatever had come from me didn't walk in our world until it reached me. The ranger advised I pack up and head home. I didn't argue. I threw everything into my Jeep and left without looking in the rearview mirror once. That was 8 months ago. I still hear that sound sometimes, usually when I'm drifting off to sleep and the night outside my window grows too quiet. Slosh drag, slosh drag. And sometimes when I wake up in the dark, I swear I can smell creek water on my pillow. Story 2. We weren't looking for trouble when we set up camp along that forgotten logging road in northern Ontario last September. We only wanted a cheap place to sleep before elk season. The road didn't even have a name, just a rusted mile marker and a trail so thin it felt like it hadn't seen a truck tire in years. My best friend Nate thought it looked peaceful. I thought it looked too quiet. Trees crowded the sky, branches knitting together so tight even the moon couldn't breathe through. We pitched our tiny yellow tent beside an old stump scarred with axe marks and fell asleep after a dinner of beans and stale bread. Around 12:40 a.m., I woke to the sound of crunching leaves. Not distant, right outside. Slow, deliberate, moving in perfect circles around our tent. Nate hissed when I reached for my flashlight. "Probably a deer," he whispered. The footsteps were too heavy for a deer, too slow for a wolf, too human. Adrenaline got the best of us. Nate unzipped the tent and threw the flap wide. Nothing, just black woods and our own misty breath. We laughed it off like idiots and zipped back up, but I couldn't settle. I lay on my back staring at the thin nylon as tree shadows crawled across it. I must have drifted off because when I opened my eyes again, my body was frozen, like my muscles had signed a pact without me. My old digital watch blinked 3:27 a.m., and something was humming outside our tent. Not just humming, rocking gently on bare heels. I couldn't see him, but I felt him in my spine before I even got the courage to turn. His shadow stretched tall across the tent fabric, hands clasped behind him like a nervous child in Sunday school. The humming wasn't a tune I knew. It sounded like something a mother would sing if she wanted her child to stay awake forever. Then he leaned forward. His silhouette sharpened against our thin wall. Wide smile, wet teeth, and when I reached up to unzip the tent, he beat me to it. The zipper jangled softly as it inched down from the outside. I scrambled backwards, slamming against Nate's legs just as the flap opened. A face appeared, not a mask, not an animal, a man, a tall, barefoot, dirt-smeared man in tattered hunting clothes. His skin looked like dry meat stretched too tight over bone, his lips dark and split, but I didn't process any of that at first because my brain was stuck on what wasn't there. He had no eyelids, just raw, exposed eyeballs bulging dry in their sockets, veins crawling across them like red worms. He didn't blink, couldn't blink. He only stared straight at me, smiling with cracked teeth, eyes shining like dead marbles. I tried to scream, but my tongue felt stapled to the roof of my mouth. He hummed louder, tilted his head like a puppet on strings. Then In a voice like someone trying to remember how to speak, he whispered, "You blink too much." Something snapped in me. I must have blacked out, or maybe my mind just shut the lights off because when I opened my eyes again, sunlight was slicing through the trees. I was lying halfway out of the tent, face in the mud, my heart hammering behind my ribs like it wanted to escape. Nate was pale, pacing like he was going to throw up. Boot prints were everywhere. Not one set, dozens, surrounding the tent in loops, like someone had been fidgeting back and forth for hours. The print stopped a few feet into the woods, then vanished like he'd been sucked into the earth. We packed up in minutes, shaking so bad we could barely snap the tent poles. Later that day, we stopped at a ranger station to report it. The officer, a stocky man with a graying beard, asked for every detail. When we described his face, the ranger went silent. He opened an old filing cabinet and pulled out a missing person photo from 1992. A hunter who vanished in that exact area. It was him. Same broad cheekbones. Same broken teeth. Same unblinking eyes without lids. Only now, he looked 30 years older, but not a day more alive. We drive straight through the night to get home. I haven't camped since. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear that humming again, low and patient. And when I wake up at 3:27 a.m., which somehow keeps happening, I swear I can feel someone standing behind my bedroom door, waiting for me to blink. Story 3. We picked Devil's Ridge because we were bored and overconfident. Two dangerous emotions for people wandering into mountains that locals whispered about with downered eyes. There were 4 of us. Me, my girlfriend Kayla, my cousin Daniel, and his new girlfriend Bree. We were young and stupid, laughing too loud as we pitched our tents beneath twisted pine trees that scraped the sky like bony fingers. The trailhead sat almost 30 miles from the nearest gas station. Perfect for an adrenaline weekend, we'd said. That first night, the woods felt too silent. No owls, no wind. Not even the bugs wanted to chirp. Around midnight, as we sat by a dying fire, a soft whisper drifted down the ridge. A voice I couldn't quite catch, breathy, careful, curious. Bree spun around, her face draining of color. "Did you hear that?" "It's just the wind," Daniel muttered, like a man trying to convince himself. Except there was no wind. The flames barely flickered. We crawled into the tents. Kayla and I zipped ourselves in, whispering jokes to shrug off the wrongness gnawing at our nerves. But around 1:13 a.m., I woke to the sound of whispering right behind our heads. It wasn't random. It sounded like me. "Come outside. I need help," the voice said, as soft and smooth as my own, like my throat had learned to speak without me. Kayla jolted awake. A heartbeat later, her own voice floated in from just outside the thin nylon wall. "Please follow me. I'm scared." Kayla clapped both hands over her mouth so she wouldn't scream. We lay frozen, paralyzed by a fear that didn't make sense. We knew we were listening to our own voices, but warped somehow, darker, hungrier, as if the woods had learned our speech. Then came a long, slow zip. Our tent zipper crept down, one tiny metallic tooth at a time. I lunged and grabbed the pole from inside, forcing it back down with shaking hands. Whatever was on the other side giggled. A sharp, stabbing giggle like children fighting over air. It was wrong, inhuman. Daniel, I whispered desperately. Bree, no answer. Only the soft crunch of leaves outside. Something was circling our tent. I held my breath, so long I felt my chest burning. Every so often the giggle returned, high-pitched, excited, drifting just inches from our faces. Somewhere near dawn, the sound stopped. The air softened. Kayla and I stayed frozen, covered in cold sweat, until pale daylight smudged the inside of our tent. When we finally dared to crawl out, the campsite was deathly still. Daniel and Bree's tent was empty, but neatly zipped from the outside. Our backpacks lay torn open. The fire pit had been completely buried with fresh soil, as if we had never been there. I staggered toward our truck, my pulse hammering nonsense. That's when I saw it, written on our dusty windshield in tall, elegant cursive. This is my campsite. No footprints around the truck. No sign of Daniel or Bree. We didn't wait. We sprinted into the truck barefoot, leaving behind everything we'd carried, and drove like hell until the mountain disappeared in the rearview mirror. Daniel and Bree turned up at home 2 days later. They swore they'd woken up in their tent at sunrise, in their own backyard, 28 miles away, their memories sliced apart like a film reel missing frames. They didn't remember leaving. They didn't know how they got there. Bree's fingernails were packed with soil. Daniel's phone had a 4 a.m. recording on it. 36 minutes of whispering, voices morphing in and out of our names, our laughter, and low-hissed words repeated in a loop. Stay with me. Stay with me. Stay with me. We don't talk about Devil's Ridge anymore. Kayla left me 3 months later. She said I stopped sleeping, stopped smiling, just stared out of windows at night, listening for some sound only I could hear. Maybe she was right, because sometimes when I lie in bed after midnight, I hear that same twisted giggle outside my house, moving slowly from the trees toward my bedroom window. And every so often, just beneath my heartbeat, I swear I hear my own voice whisper back,